So we are going to get started, everyone. Thank you. Thank you all so much for being here on behalf of the UNLV Harrah College of Hospitality and our Alumni Board of Directors. Again, thank you for joining us on this Saturday afternoon. And whether you're a seasoned veteran of our program, Salud, Prost, Cheers, or just here for the beer, that's okay. I'm glad you made it. And before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping notes. Your cameras and microphones should have been muted automatically, but if not, could you help us minimize some of the distractions and noise and make sure those are off? We've got some awesome brewers and panelists here, so I don't want to have you miss any of the fun. And just so you know, it's being recorded, and this will be posted to our YouTube later on. If you have any questions during the beer tasting, please use the Q&A feature. You can type anything you want in there for questions, and we'll get to them as soon as we can. And keep an eye out for questions in case you have the same one as someone else. You can actually upvote them so you can see them at the top of the list. My name is Jen Oshiro Rivers. I'm a 2005-2008 graduate of UNLV. I serve in a couple of different volunteer capacities with the Alumni Association and specifically the College of Hospitality Alumni chapter. But what's most important today is that I like beer, and especially craft beer. And whenever we travel, my husband and I always seek out a brewery or two or three and try some of their beers. We're on Untapped. We get the stickers. We love a good beer tasting. So we're, again, very happy to be here with all of you. Before I introduce you to our brewers and panelists, I want to remind everyone that the Hospitality Alumni Chapter has a host of awesome programs coming up. We've been offering these online programs since March when we had to pivot our events to the digital format. And whether you're interested in food and beverage, because who's not, and mentoring students or career development, we invite you to check out some of our programs on our website at unlv.edu/hospitality or on any of our social media platforms. Next month on Salud Prost Cheers, we're featuring Tim Honberry from the Back Bar USA, who will show us a classic Paloma cocktail as well as some other holiday-themed drinks. It's scheduled for November 21st, and registration will be live soon. And with that, I'll introduce our brewers. First, I'd like to introduce Amanda Koeller. Amanda is a professional brewer and has been the lead brewer for Big Dogs Brewing Company in Las Vegas since 2015. She works in all areas of the brewing process and manages the brew schedule and production efficiency. Amanda earned a BS in hotel administration with a focus on hospitality management from UNLV. She also completed the Master Brewers program as well as earned the Professional Brewers Certificate from the University of California, Davis. She's a member of the Institute of Brewing and Distilling, the Brewers Association, and the Las Vegas chapter leader of the Pink Boots Society. She is currently working to expand local awareness of the Pink Boots Society, which raises money for the nonprofit organization to supply educational scholarships for its members and advancing their careers in the beer industry. Thanks for being here, Amanda.
Thanks for having me.
Next up, we have another friend of the Hospitality College, Wyndee Forrest, co-owner and founder of CraftHaus Brewery. And inspired by a graduation trip to Europe, Wyndee and her husband Dave built the CraftHaus Brewery based on building a community around quality-driven beer. They have advocated for the industry and were successful in writing licensing for Henderson and Las Vegas to improve the craft beer scene. I.e., before them, there weren't any breweries officially in Henderson. So we have Wyndee and Dave to thank for that. Wyndee and Dave just celebrated CraftHaus Brewery's 6th anniversary, and they also have a tasting room in the Arts District. Hi, Wyndee. Thanks.
Yay.
Next, we're excited to be joined by John Griffith, owner and head brewer of Mojave Brewing, as well as Nate Carney, co-owner and brewer. Griff started home brewing 20 years ago in Kalamazoo, Michigan. He got his start after the brewers of Bell's Brewery frequented his coffee shop, which was across the street, and told Griff that he brewed such great coffee, he should try brewing beer. He competed in the 2015 Great American Beer Festival as a pro-am entrant with Joseph James Brewing and has interned with Joyride Brewing in Edgewater, Colorado. Nate grew up in a military family and was fortunate enough to have lived in Germany in his early teens. Unbeknownst to his parents, he would sneak off and sample some of the local brews, which he says is where his love of beer started. He began homebrewing 8 years ago. Griff and Nate are both former CCSD teachers and connected as friends a couple years ago. And together with Griff's wife, Chrissy, Mojave Brewing opened their doors just 6 weeks prior to the COVID shutdown on February 2nd, 2020. 2020. And last but certainly not least, we are joined by Mike Amidi, our impartial, knowledgeable expert, as opposed to my unknowledgeable enthusiasm. And he has earned his BS from Florida International University in hotel and restaurant management. Mike has held nearly every position in the field, from busser to line cook, and to those in hotel management. And here are a few of them. As general manager, Mike opened up BBD's, a 200-seat craft beer and food destination here in Vegas. I'm very happy I was able to get to visit there at one point. He also served as the beverage manager at Turst in Brooklyn, New York, which was a semi-finalist for the James Beard Award for Outstanding Bar Program in 2015. He was also the export manager for Evil Twin Brewing, getting their beer sold in over 30 countries. Hello. Thank you again for being here.
Hello.
And with that, I think we're ready to start drinking. So Amanda, I'll turn it over to you if you want to tell us more about your beer.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much. So happy to be here with everybody. So, of course, like, what would a beer event be without actually drinking some beer? So pull up the Vienna dog, Vienna lager. So as I think all good beer names come to play, this was a name before it was a beer. And it was while the brewers were drinking bourbon, because that's what brewers like to do, right? And so we came up with, what are we going to call it? We're going to call it Vienna Dog. And we're going to have a dachshund on the label. So for this, let's open it up and we'll give it a pour. I'm going to pour it into actually a traditional Pilsner glass. A lot of Pilsner glasses we're looking to accentuate the color of the beer. This one is actually straight from Germany, and I don't know if you can see it on this, but it's actually like a shattered glass look, which is pretty impressive, but I decided to use it anyways, just because it is straight from Germany. So we're going to go ahead and pour the beer into here. And then pouring it into a Pilsner glass. So it's going to accentuate the color. It's going to accentuate the carbonation of this beer. So it's going to pour a beautiful copper color, and we're going to have a off-white head on this beer, and this glass is actually going to accentuate the carbonation as well for this beer. So I hope everybody has that poured. So to brew this beer, we did traditional ingredients. So we're looking at traditional malt, traditional hops, and traditional yeast. So we used a German yeast strain to brew it, and the traditional malts that we used are actually from Germany. So Bayerman malt. So we had some Vienna, of course, malt, because it is a Vienna lager. So majority of the grist on this is Vienna malt. And then we used a little bit of Munich malt and some Pilsner. So we do have German hops in here, Hallertau and Saaz. So let's go ahead and smell the beer first, as always, before we drink it. And that's really why we pour it into a glass, so that we can smell it as we drink it. So we're going to have some toast character, a lot of like that warm bread character. So think of like bread as it's baking and how that smells. And you can really get that in this beer. And then let's go ahead and take a sip of it. Again, we're going to have that bread character. We're going to have some toast character in there, just a slight bit of roast character as we added like a very, very, very small amount of roasted malt, mainly just for like that slight roast character, a little bit of color to help with that. This is a clean, crisp beer. The German hops that are in there, Hallertau and Saaz, they're really just not in there to make it a bitter beer. They're in there to balance the malt sweetness of it. Maybe just like a slight little bit of bitterness in the beginning, but for the most part, it's just to balance the malt. So to give you a little bit of a history on Vienna Lager. So this has been a style since 1841. And the really interesting thing about this is until, you know, like we're talking like the mid 1800s, early 1800s, the only beer that was brewed really was like browning. And we're talking like in order to make malt, you have to kiln it at the end. And the kilning until the 1800s was direct fire. So when you were kilning malt, you were really getting kind of like an uneven distribution of heat on your malt. So you would have some malt that wasn't kilned at all, that was pretty wet at the end. And then you were having some that was pretty scorched. And the scorched malt in the end was making a lot of brown beers. So when you look at the history of Britain and throughout Europe, everything really tended to have a brown color to it, and it was due to the process of how malt was kilned. So in the early 1800s, Britain was actually the first country to create an indirect fire. So rather than having fire directly drying the malt, it was indirect fire to where they were heating air, and it was air that was drying the malt. So what this was doing was it was giving you more control over how you were drying your malt. So you could have malt that was pale, and then you could also have like different types of malt that was actually, you know, like darker and crystal and you know, into different variants of malt. There just wasn't one type of malt that you were creating. So the interesting thing is that after the British came up with this technology, it was Anton Dreyer of Schwechat Brewery in Vienna and his very good friend Gabriel Sedlmayr of Spaten Brewery in Munich. They kind of did a trip to England to try and figure out how it was that they started making pale ales. And so they wanted to know how it was that they were kilning their malt in order to create this. And so like some people call it like espionage, like business espionage of how it is that they went in there and they snuck in there and they figured out how it was that they were doing this. And they came back to Bavaria for Sedlmayr and to Austria for Dreyer, and they created their indirect fire kilns themselves. And so they were able to, you know, create the malt that they wanted. And from that stemmed for Dreyer, it stemmed the Vienna Lager. And for Sedlmayr, you know, it created the very popular, which most of you probably know, the Märzen. And so from there now, we created in like the mid 1800s, the pale ale and the Vienna Lager, the Märzen. And just to put things in perspective of how old the Vienna Lager is, the Pilsner, which I'm sure that everybody has heard of, came in at 1842. So we're talking the Vienna Lager actually preceded, you know, 1841, the Pilsner by 1 year. So interesting. And when the Pilsner came into the market, and the Vienna Lager, even though it's very well known for me because I brewed it for so many years around this time of year, is actually pretty much a dead style in Europe. However, this beer style had made its way into Mexico, and the Vienna Lager has really influenced a lot of the Mexican lagers there. So when you're drinking a Mexican lager, you're really looking at the history of Vienna lager. And the Märzen has made it, has never really died out, but we can thank Mexico and I think the American craft beer industry for the keeping the Vienna lager around. So cheers, I hope you enjoyed this beer.
Cheers.
Well, I was thinking while we sip on this first beer, talking a little bit about Oktoberfest. I know, Amanda, you mentioned that you actually went a couple years ago. What was it like?
Yes. Yeah, so I was so fortunate, and like I always think in the times of COVID, you don't realize how fortunate you are to do things until you live in this time. And 2 years ago, I was able to travel to Munich and attend Oktoberfest, and I was there for 7 days, and I attended 4 days of Oktoberfest. And I have to tell everybody, if you have the chance, and even if I would put it on your bucket list, it needs to happen. Oktoberfest in Munich was amazing. So of course I've got my my traditional dirndl on with my apron that I wore there, but on top of that, I mean, you talk about a beer festival that people from all over the world come to. Like our very first day that we were there, we were sitting at a table with four men from Finland and just learning everything about them. And then we had 2 different occasions where we were sitting at table from people from Britain, and just such a wonderful time. I was telling everybody on this panel, I made it up on stage in the Lowenbrow tent. It was completely shocking, singing Sweet Caroline, because there's a certain point in the evening, like during the day, they sing German folk songs, and in the evening, it is the American music that we would sing at like a piano bar. What a wonderful experience, meeting new people, and I have to tell you, Germany is a beautiful country, and the people there are so warm, so welcoming, and I honestly can't wait to go back to Oktoberfest. And if you go, you absolutely have to dress in lederhosen and dirndls, or else you will be out of place. If you think it's weird going into the festival like that, absolutely not. You will be out of place if you're not in costume.
Crazy. Mike, as our resident expert, any thoughts or notes on the beer we're tasting?
No, I thought Amanda did a great job of the history. I think it's so interesting, the history of these beers, both the Märzen and the Vienna Lager, especially the part where it makes it over to Mexico, which seems so weird to have this traditional, German, Viennese style beer be popular in Mexico. So when you're drinking that Negra Modelo, it's a Vienna lager, and a lot of people don't recognize the history of that. So it's super cool. The other thing I think is really interesting is the types of beer that they're drinking at Oktoberfest now are really not these darker Vienna lagers and Märzens anymore. And it hasn't been for quite some time. As there's not really a true style for Oktoberfest. It started like Amanda was saying with a darker beer, more akin to like a Dunkel, and as time went on, the Märzen came into play, and it was there for a good long while, 100 years or so, I think. And then in more modern times, as the people's taste started to get, they wanted to see lighter and lighter beers. The beers for Oktoberfest got lighter and lighter, but these are the more traditional styles. So I think it's really cool that, you think of Germany as this place where they don't like to change things, but the Oktoberfest beer has changed over the years. But Americans, who usually like to change things as much as we can and take things to the extreme, we're the ones that are serving more traditional Oktoberfest style beers for Oktoberfest, which I think is kind of funny. But the beer is great.
Thank you, Mike. It's so true, though. When I was in Germany, honestly, the Munich Helles was the most popular beer that was served at most of the tents. And so you're looking at a Helles, a very light beer. And no matter what the beer style is, for Oktoberfest, they actually tend to drop the alcohol by volume, specifically for that, as they serve the beers in liters. And so they're looking at, because when you're at Oktoberfest, you're there for a session. This is session beer time. And even if the alcohol by volume is normally higher on their traditional beers, they always drop it down. And then we would get there in the morning, and yes, because Oktoberfest starts in the morning, and you would drink Radlers. And so they call it lemonade and beer. And yes, I would drink Radlers a liter at a time because I knew I had a long time ahead of me. But their lemonade is not like our lemonade. It's sparkling lemonade. Yep. So if anybody wants to have a lemonade there, it is sparkling. It's more like a soda than it is a lemonade. And yeah, and that's what we would drink. And there's places that actually had non-alcoholic versions. There were normally 4 options. So you had a Dunkel. So a dark beer, you had a Helles, a light beer, you had a Radler, which was your mix of your Helles and your lemonade, and you would have sometimes an alcoholic option.
And speaking of liters, I think I saw a statistic that 7.7 million liters were served at one point, which for us in America, because I don't know the metric system, it's 1.7 million gallons. If you can imagine that, that's crazy.
Yeah. That's just another Saturday. No big deal.
This is what your beer came in here. This is what I'll be pouring, Nate and Griff. I'll be pouring your beer in this.
Nice.
This
Cheers.
is every beer.
I love it. That's the best.
Can you bring 8 of those to a table?
Yeah, right. I can't. On one hand.
All right.
Let me tell you the amount. I saw double stack, so we're talking 5 per hand probably, and then actually double stack. Walk, drop it, grab the double stack, and put it down. Most impressive thing is the servers at Oktoberfest and how fast you get a beer with 10,000 people there. Amazing.
That's incredible. I love it.
And we're very excited to have Amanda here because you hosted your own Oktoberfest earlier with Big Dogs. How'd that go?
Yep.
How you holding up, Amanda?
I'm doing good.
Very cool.
Did you start the day with the Radler this morning?
Oh man, I didn't, but I should have.
I have a question for Mike.
I should have.
Mike, I'm under the impression that they're not holding Oktoberfest this year, and it's the first time ever that they're
Correct.
not.
Yep.
Is it the first time? Yeah, I think that they have. I think they haven't done it in the past, but in times of cholera, I think they didn't have one. And I think there was a World War that got in the way once too.
Yeah, I imagine in the Great War. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
they let a few things get in the way, but not many things.
Which is pretty incredible. Cholera and the world wars, and of course 2020 COVID are the only reason since I think 1810 that Oktoberfest has been canceled.
Kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Just a couple other fun facts, I think, in case folks don't know. Typically, we're actually a little bit later than traditional Oktoberfest period, 16 to 18 days, usually starting from mid to late September until the first Sunday in October or so. But, with Vegas weather, we don't really get to enjoy that fall flavor feeling and season until a little bit later on. So I'm glad we're still hosting it. And I think if other people don't know it, may have started because of a marriage and a horse race and all these fun activities that they decided to do year on year, and here we are today, which is kind of crazy. Yeah. Well, very cool.
Well, and for the same reason that it's nice to have it closer to this time of year for us is I think historically also how it got pushed back too, because in Germany, obviously it's getting pretty cold in mid-October, which I think is when the wedding was historically. So they started pushing it earlier and earlier so that they could depend on the weather a little bit more.
Oh goodness, it always comes down to weather, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, you may not have finished your beer yet, but I want to keep us on schedule. So we are going to get into CraftHaus Beer. So I'll turn it over to Wyndee. Tell us a bit more.
Hi, guys. So you'll be grabbing the HausFest can on there. And just a little bit of backstory and history on my husband, Dave, and I were the owners and co-founders of CraftHaus Brewery in Henderson. So we graduated from UNLV. We both graduated from the hospitality school, Go Rebels. And then we went over to Europe. So we backpacked through Europe for 4 weeks. And that's where we were really, our beer aha moment was in Amsterdam. So we were on the canals having beers. We weren't beer geeks yet. We didn't know about IBUs and ABVs and SRMs and all of the science. But what really drew us into craft beer was, first and foremost, it has flavor, right? So us as Americans, we're used to fizzy yellow beer. And there we were sitting on the canals on a beautiful sunny day having lunch, and beer had flavor. And then we paired it with the food that we were eating, and then it brought out different flavors and aromas that weren't there prior. But most of all, when we looked around, it was bringing people together. Beer was bringing people together, whether they were talking about beer or not. For those of us who've traveled to Europe, it's very un-American to be seated at a table with a stranger. However, it's the norm there, right? And especially like Oktoberfest is the prime example of it. You have these extensively long beer garden tables where you're sitting at one table with 50 to 60 people. So Dave, his degree is in recreation. So any excuse to get people together, to gather, to build a community, he fell in love. And so did I. So then we traveled for another 3 weeks, primarily through the Bavarian region of Germany. And we went to every tiny little town and went to every tiny little brewery that we can find. There's no shortage of breweries, especially in Bavaria. And we were enamored. So we come home and we tried to find that here, especially in Henderson. So not to discount what Big Dogs has done prior to us opening for 20 years plus. It just wasn't in Henderson. So we looked for that here, couldn't really find it. So then Dave started home brewing and making those flavors and styles that we fell in love with in Europe and primarily Bavaria. So then Griff and Nate and Amanda started as a home brewer. That's the bug that starts the whole itch. And it just snowballs and it keeps going and going and going and going. And then the more you learn, you know, the more you learn, you don't know in beer. So Dave started home brewing, and then he won a contest at Sierra Nevada to go to beer camp. So they chose 10 people from across the nation. So Dave got to go to Sierra Nevada, brew on Sierra Nevada system with 9 other winners from across the nation. And he's inspired, and Ken Grossman is still the owner and founder and independently owned, and Sierra Nevada is amazing, and they have a carbon negative footprint in Chico. They sell back their credits to the town. So he comes back home and he's like, we should move to Chico. And I was like, no, it feels beautiful. It's not a whole bunch going on. They have their own brewery. They're doing pretty good. So I said, well, why don't we take that Sierra Nevada inspiration and build on that here in Henderson? So needless to say, we went with Plan B. So it was 4 years from Dave saying, hey, let's move to Chico to us actually opening in Henderson. And within those 4 years, we talked to anybody in the industry that would give us 2 minutes of their time. There weren't a lot of books at that time. I think that was 06, 08 on how to open your own brewery, but we read them all. We read them 4 to 5 times. We went to any conference that we could possibly go to. And within doing that, we fell in love with the industry just as we had fallen in love with craft beer and that artistic expression also coupled with science behind it. And history, I love all the history. Thank you, Amanda, for the amazing history lesson. It's not really a lesson if you're enjoying beer. It's super fun. So we were inspired by that to open CraftHaus. So we went to the city. We said, hey, this is what we want to do. Brewery with tap room. The only other brewery that was open in Henderson was Barley's. So they're owned by Station Casinos. So that was a gaming location. So the city said, well, there's 2 licenses. You can open a brew pub in the, and that's $60,000, and it automatically comes with gaming. Or you could open a brewery, and you can't have a tap room. So we said, not really either of what we were looking for. So we said, well, the brew pub, we don't want to have gaming because that will detract from us building a community. And that really is at the heart of why we opened CraftHaus, was to build a community around quality-driven beer. So the city said, oh, no, you don't have to have gaming, but you just have to pay for it. So as a point of reference, San Diego County, a brew pub license is $1,000. So to throw $60,000 of a gaming license that we weren't even going to benefit from was a big pill to swallow. So we said, no, we don't have to pay for it. So instead, I became a registered lobbyist for the city of Henderson. I lobbied city council for over a year. And within that time, I made really great relationships within the city. And now they're happy to use us as the poster child for, hey, you can have a brewery in your city. They do once a year a national conference for cities and planning, and they usually do a tour of our location to show how we integrated within the community and increase business. So it was finally approved after, I think, 16 months of lobbying city council every month. But they were helpful. I had to write and craft the new license, but they helped me along the way. So we're like, yay, let's open finally. But then it's never that super easy. So I had to rezone our business park. So if you've been to the booze district, there's us, there's Bad Beat Brewing, Astronomy Brewing, there's Vegas Valley Winery, which is also expectations, and then there's the beginning of the booze district. The first alcohol manufacturer here was the Las Vegas Distillery. So when I rezoned our business park, I had it rezoned to have the tap room portion of the licensing. So in doing that, Dave and I's plan was to build a community. And that included building a community of other breweries and other business owners. Because you can't have a community with just one. One is not a multiple, so there's not a community there. So after we did that, 5 other breweries have opened, and that's what we wanted. And people, like to jab each other in the tap room. Oh, we went to your competition. It's like, no, there's not competition within the craft beer industry. It's all built on community, and that's really what inspired us to open CraftHaus Brewery. So after that long explanation, let's have some beer. I'm sure you probably already opened it, but HausFest, because our anniversary is middle of September, we didn't, prior to this, ever brew an Oktoberfest or a Märzen, anything that was along those lines, because we were brewing beers for our anniversary. But this year, we bucked that, and we wanted to brew a fest beer or a Märzen in celebration of Oktoberfest. But we wanted to put a little bit of a unique spin on it. A lot of Oktoberfest beers, they're beautiful. They're meant to be drank in high volume quantities. So you don't want your palate to be exhausted and thrown a whole bunch of hops or high alcohol by volume. But with that, they can be a little one note. So what Cameron, our head brewer, who's also a UNLV alumni, go Rebels, he decided that he wanted to lager this on Spanish Cedar, which, this is for all the geeks out there, Spanish Cedar is not officially a cedar, but it's still called Spanish Cedar because cedar is toxic to humans. So Spanish Cedar is not. So don't worry, we're not going to kill you. So with that, with having that Spanish Cedar in the fermenter when it's lagering cold, it just added a nice little bit of woody, peppery bite kind of on the back end of the finish. So let's pour ours if you haven't already. It's always great to have a glass, as Amanda mentioned before. That way you can smell the aroma of your beer. You can add more components than you can taste. So always make sure you're smelling what you're drinking before you taste it. You'll get a lot more flavor combination there that you can pick up on the aroma. The color, just a light amber, a light honey. Martzens were traditionally brewed in March, so that's where Marzen, the German name, comes from. And then they were lagered or cellared throughout the summer and then served during Oktoberfest season. So because they were lagering or cellaring for so long, the alcohol by volume was a little bit higher, and they just bumped up the hops on this beer style as well. So like I said, the Vienna lager, those are not going to highlight hops like we as Americans have a love affair with hops and how much can we jam in and how many can we combine and how many international bittering units can we get it above 100, even though it doesn't go past 100. But the Germans, they're not really lovers of the hops, but malt. So malt is what is highlighted in the Oktoberfest beers, the Marzens, the Vienna lagers. The malt is really is the shining star in these beers, and that allows them to be enjoyed at large quantities. So it's all in the master plan. So cheers. Happy Oktoberfest. We haven't done the we needed like playing the long
Don't, Mike.
Just a reminder to our attendees, if you have any questions for the brewers or our other panelists, please put it in the Q&A box and we'll get to it. But while we still have Wyndee around, I wanted to point out that you had a beer release yesterday, and I happened to be at the brewery pickup, and your bartender said it sold out in 45 minutes.
Wow.
At least at the Chad location.
Yes, so we have 2 tap rooms. The original Henderson Brewery has a tap room, 6 years old. And then we have the Arts District tap room. It's just a tasting room. There's no brewing there. And that just celebrated its 1st anniversary. So they had a certain allocation of cases that went to Arts District. And they sold out 6 cases in 45 minutes. And then when I came to help, had our distributor meet us there. I was like, we need more beer. So this is the beer. So we brewed a very un-Oktoberfest beer as well. So this is what's called a milkshake IPA. It's like if you deconstructed a strawberry mochi and made it into a beer. So it's a strawberry mochi milkshake IPA. So what that means, so it's a hazy IPA, so there's a lot of hop aromas in there for the late hop additions, not a lot of bitterness. So we chose hops that had berry aromas to them, Hall Melon, Motueka, I can't remember the third one. It's on the label. And then we added in puff rice. So that's where the rice paste component for mochi comes. And then when we put it in the brew kettle, we added the lactose. That's what a milkshake IPA style makes it a milkshake. It has lactose. And then when we put it in the fermenter, we added in 400 pounds of pure strawberry puree. So that's where the strawberry comes from. So it was a lot of fun. We did sell out of all 90 cases at both locations by 6:30.
Amazing.
So it was a lot of fun. I used to live in Japan for 2 years, so I named it Sugoi, which means "oh my gosh" or "how wonderful" in kanji Japanese. So it was a lot of fun.
Very cool. Well, before we move on to our last beer, would love to hear about some of the current beer trends. I did a little bit of research, and I would love your opinions and thoughts on this. First on my list, I see it everywhere on Instagram, is the beer slushy, that folks are putting their cans in their freezer and nearly destroying it as they try to get the slushy out of the can. And Wyndee, you've offered some in the what can only be described as the adult Capri Sun packets. Tell me more about that.
So there are two different kind of beer style distinctions. So there is a slushy beer, which uses a large volume of fruit puree, real fruit puree. And then some breweries got into issues with canning real fruit because then it goes through a secondary fermentation and you have exploding cans. So all of the strawberry puree that was in Sugoi fermented in the fermenter, so we won't have exploding cans. Then there is also a frozen, like Slurpee style slushy, and that's what we do just for fun. It brings people in who maybe might not think of coming into a brewery or a tap room. It's approachable. I use fun ingredients, and it kind of maybe breaks up the monotony of maybe beer drinking session. So we use a margarita machine. And so there's two sides, and each side will have a seasonal flavor. Right now we have caramel apple with Silver State, our blonde ale. And then on the other side, we have mulled ale. So I simmered Concord grape juice with mulling spices, like you would have a mulled wine during the fall season. But then we added it to our evocation saison. So those are frozen beer slushies, but there's two kind of slushy worlds.
People are loving the slushies these days.
Yeah.
First time I saw, I actually don't know where it got its start, but the first time I saw it was the guys at Omnipolo started doing it. And I think they were actually using the beer and putting it in the slushy machine to firm it up, basically give it that kind of snowy ice texture, and then would serve it on top of the beer. So they would pour the beer to a portion of the glass and then fill the rest with the slushy mixture. So you're basically getting the frozen version, the liquid version, and then a lot of times they'll put something crazy on top as well. So it's one of those things that's is not for the purists, but everybody loves it because it can be so cool.
Yeah, and like Mike said, it's not for the purists. When I went to school, I was learning from, if anybody knows, like the famous name Charlie Bamforth.
Charlie,
one of my instructors. And Charlie said beer needs to be bright, like bright beer. So that was always like one of the things that when I came out of school, beer needed to be bright, unless of course it was like a traditional Hefeweizen. So for many years, Dave Pasquale and we refused to make even like the New England, like the hazy IPAs, because beer should be bright unless it is traditionally over, and like traditionally we meant like hundreds of, like 100 years, the Hefeweizen, like unless that was the case. However, like market demands a certain thing, as a brewer, you really need to follow, if you're going to stay relevant, especially in the craft beer industry, you need to follow trends. And so, of course, we started to brew, like the New England IPAs and start to create hazy IPAs, which I think we do very well. And from there, I think this might be in the future for us. It's yet to be determined, but I am also a believer that if something can introduce a person to beer, and then why not try it? And I look at hazy IPAs like the gateway to IPAs, even though, like, for me, my very first IPA I ever had was a very bitter IPA, Stone IPA, and I didn't know what an IPA was, and I loved it. From the second I tried it, it wasn't an acquired taste for me. I literally thought that it was the best thing I had ever drank in my life. But some people need to have that introduction. It's a little slower. So, like hazy IPAs, they're not bitter, they're hop forward on the aroma and on the flavor, but not bitter. So maybe that's a good introduction. And, we'll see what happens with like these rosés and what happens. And we'll see what Big Dogs does. Like the good thing about working for Big Dogs is they always leave it to the brewers to really make the final decision. So, we'll decide what we do with fruit in the future. But like I said, if it gets a person to like beer, then why not?
Gateway beers work for sure. Like, because it's like if you think about sour beers. If you give somebody a sour beer right off the bat, like they have no idea how to relate it to anything they know, right? It's just like something seems so over the top, they can't quite like peg it. So if you can find the one beer, and this works for all styles really, and working at the bar, you'd see this all the time. If you could find that one beer that made sense to the customer that was in that same style, even if they had already had that one that they didn't understand and they thought, like, who could drink this? It's like drinking vinegar. But then if you give them like a Rodenbach Grand Cru or something like that has like a little bit of sweetness, a little bit of that familiarity, then it kind of unlocks it. And then they can then go back to that other sour beer and appreciate it more. And I think the same works for all styles. So I agree 100%. Like anything you can do to get beer drinkers through the door is a win, because once they're there, you can turn them on to all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, no doubt, Mike. And like the one thing I always do, especially like with sour beers, I'm like with people that are like, I don't like beer. I'm like, I want you to drink this as a beverage. I don't want you to have the preconceived notion of what a beer is when you drink this.
Right.
So every time you drink a beer, like, don't think I'm trying a new beer. Think I'm trying a new beverage. And so that way your brain doesn't have like this preconceived, like, what a beer is. And then when you try a sour beer, you're just trying a beverage. And when you drink that beverage, your brain will actually be able to like decide for itself if I like it or if I don't.
Right. Yeah. It still amazes me in this day and age, after the popularity of craft beer for so long, that you can run into people, and it happens more times than not, that still have this very specific idea of what beer is. In their heads, the beer that they grew up on, which is usually like a shitty pale lager. So when you give them anything other than that, they're like, "This isn't beer. What is this?" And that whole conversation is so cool, because then you can like open up this whole Pandora's box of this awesome stuff for them.
I think a lot of people are becoming more adventurous with supporting local. So when we've been shut down with COVID, I think the support local movement came back around again, and and was revitalized. And now that the businesses, our businesses are open, and our businesses honestly are struggling, supporting local really makes a huge difference within our community. The craft beer industry is known for being one of the most philanthropic industries across the nation. We support just about every nonprofit that comes knocking at our door, but we're also champions for human rights, for civil rights, and the list goes on and on. So I think it's great. If there is a silver lining with COVID, it's a new renewed love of supporting local, because it makes a huge difference. So we try to do it as much as we can with our suppliers and with our vendors, because we can't keep preaching support local if we don't do it as well. So we partner with a local coffee roaster, Best Coffee. He's in the Arts District. Our spent grain pretzels, that if you guys ordered the spent grain pretzels, those are made locally from Great Funds. So we try on every avenue with the people who make our glassware, to our suppliers for our merch, and for the ingredients within our beer. We try to keep it local as possible, because that's going to keep our industry going, and it's going to keep our community thriving. So really, I can't preach enough. Like, local is the only way. And, there was a Nielsen study done last year, and the first question that people ask when they go into a bar is, what do you have that's new? The second question they ask is, what do you have that's local? So people are asking, and it makes a difference. And we're proud to be part of our community, and we're proud to support it. And we love that our community is so welcoming with our craft breweries that are opening, because we love our community, and we're proud to make beer for them, to bring beer to other states and show them, what we're making here in our state. Big Dogs has won multiple Great American Beer Fest awards. That's kind of like the Oscars of beer awards that happened last night. A lot of things to be proud of, things that are locally made in our state. And I'm proud to be in Nevada. Cheers. Go Nevada.
Cheers.
Cheers.
And before we craft into Mojave's beer, I wondered, maybe I can start off with Nate and Griff. We talked about hazies and sours and slushies. Are there other trends going on, or things you see on the horizon that our attendees might be interested in knowing?
At our brewery right now, we're working very hard towards providing cask ale. It's something that is a passion of mine after spending a little bit of time in Colorado and having a lot of fun and great experience learning from the brewers and the proprietors at Hogshead. And I feel that there are a number of different avenues that we can follow. I love Vegas beer, because when we follow tradition, we stick to tradition. When we move into more experimental options, we take the handcuffs off and we go crazy, and we follow what we can follow and get really passionate about it. And that's pretty much where we're going right now. We're excited about our cask ale program.
Awesome. Amanda, any big trends or things you see in the industry that our attendees might need to keep an eye out for?
No, I really think like the trend that continues is the New England IPAs. It seems to me that whenever we brew them, they sell out so fast. And of course, like, everybody wants us to brew a frosé, which is heavily hop or heavily fruited. So like what we have coming up, of course, like New England IPA is always a big seller for us. And then what we're working on now, Dave Pasquale and I, we're actually doing a 15-barrel batch of a New England IPA that we've added like incrementally 500 pounds of Oregon blueberries to. So initially, because we just never know what kind of characteristics we're going to have when fruit ferments. And so we initially added about 300 pounds of blueberries a day after fermentation kicked off. And we really liked what was happening there. And so then we added the additional 200 pounds actually yesterday. And then, so it's turning out to be really wonderful. It'll probably be the most expensive beer that we've ever brewed. And I'm sure that the other breweries can appreciate this because New England IPAs, we don't reuse the yeast as we do with our house yeast. And so we purchase new yeast every time we brew that kind of IPA. And then on top of that, the 500 pounds of blueberries is extremely expensive. However, from what Dave and I are tasting, the beer is going to be phenomenal. And we're fermenting the fruit, so we don't have to worry about exploding cans, and that's why we fermented the fruit, because we're always worried about that. Anytime that we add fruit post-fermentation, which honestly, for us, we know exactly what's going to happen when we add it post-fermentation, because we know that fruit character will come through as it is. However, you stand a chance of re-fermentation and exploding cans or over-pressurized kegs. So this time we decided to add it to the fermenter, and we're adding it in increments. But however, how it's tasting, turns out blueberry might ferment really well. So we're excited for that.
Nice.
But as far as changing beer styles go, like I said, it was very difficult coming from the originist, UC Davis. This is what beer looks like. This is what beer tastes like. And I completely agree with, the bright, the crisp, you should work hard to make bright beer unless the style calls for it. And, but there's so many changes in the industry right now that we really have to roll with it. And then you have to take the new styles and make it the best that your ability is to make it. So that's where I'm at, and that's where I think the talking about.
Wyndee, any other trends?
Right?
I
I think the Frosé and the New England IPA, those seem to be the biggest trend now for us. Mike, what do you think? What are you seeing on the consumer?
For trends, it seems like we're still stuck in the hazy trend, which it has been good for beer. I think it's gotten a lot of new people into the scene, despite how a lot of the serious, quote unquote serious beer nerds feel about it. But I think that continues to go strong. I think the stuff that you see coming up, obviously, is lactose and everything. The IPAs, the stouts, and then what I hope is coming is lagers, like we have today. We've been talking about it for a couple of years. It's the next thing. Same with session beers. That was being talked about. It was going to be the next big thing, but they haven't come into fruition 100%. But I think lagers make a lot of sense. After all all of the excesses of beer as it's been for the last 5 or 6 years, like to turn the corner and to focus on like really quality crisp lagers, I think would be awesome. So I kind of hope that's what's coming. That would be great. But the other big thing in the industry, obviously, which is, you know, super polarizing and kind of tough for all of you guys, is the seltzer, you know, alcoholic seltzer trend. And some of the breweries are taking it on and creating them at the brewery. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but you know, it's something. It's taking market share for sure, and it's you know, we'll see where it goes, but it's definitely huge the last year. So
Nate and Griff, are we ready to talk about Festivus for the rest of us?
Festivus for the rest of us.
Festivus for the rest of us. So, pick up your lovely flat black can of Festivus, please.
Oh, Amanda, I love the can. I love it.
Oh, Amanda, you're amazing. Thank you. I remember the first time I poured a pint of beer. So let's open that up, and Nate and I are going to have a contest.
Wait, what?
Yes.
I didn't know about this contest.
Yeah, well, we are going to see who can pour the better pint, and you guys can decide. Please chime in on the chat. We'd like to see. I'm going to try pouring a pint. Let's go back to the basics and see. All right, and Mike, you're part of this as well, sir, as the expert. Oh, look at, he's already got it. Look at that.
Okay.
So that's what we're going for right there. And here we go. Oh, I spilled.
And allow for another room.
2 fingers of foam. 2 fingers of foam. All right, guys. Did you see it? Good job.
Oh, slow poke over here.
that's pretty perfect.
Now I will say that we have 20-ounce glasses, so of course if you're working with a pint glass, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. Naturally, by the color, you can see that we're doing. Cheers, Nate. We're doing a more traditional Oktoberfest. It was mentioned earlier that Oktoberfest has been going lighter and lighter. We're kind of the new kids on the block. We wanted to sort of trace roots back, and this is a Marzen that has then been lagered. Naturally, we did not lager. Oh, that's beautiful, Amanda. Thank you. And naturally, we did not lager throughout the summer. However, we did try to affect that sort of traditional Oktoberfest, which, as you can see, it pours dark. We're looking for a clear but beautiful amber kind of ruby red beer. And at this stage, let's not waste the wonderful aroma of the bready malt that we have. And let's have a drink. Ladies and gentlemen, I encourage a 3-sip drink. If you want to do a little short drink, that's your choice. But
Amanda, you can chug that.
Prost.
It's amazing.
Cheers. Thank you. Oh, you're kind. You're too kind. So we got really excited about this. This is one of the beers that, as we started to pull out of the downturn and we started feeling bullish again, we were able to dedicate some money towards. We're in a new brewery, and we had a really tough time getting through this. This is one where we just pulled out the stops and pulled the malt that we needed to pull, and got the hops that we needed. And we danced between Tettnang and Saaz on the hops. But of course, as stated earlier, we're interested in a lovely balance of floral earthy that only complements the incredible malt flavor of the Vienna and couple of different Munich malts that contributed the true flavor to this beer. So we have light Munich malt, and then we have a darker Munich malt. So Amanda did a wonderful explanation of the beautiful and artistic development of our malting abilities now in this modern world that were developed, that at that time was new science. Just like steam engines and everything else. But now we have the ability to type into a computer and have an order come to us with these beautiful malts. And so we took light malt and we took dark malt, and we were able to balance that alongside a little bit of Vienna. And that's about that, with a beautiful backing of floral and earthy hop balance. So cheers, everyone. I hope that you enjoy your beer. And we enjoy drinking with you. We're so very excited to drink with you again. Cheers.
Yeah, absolutely. Really excited to have you come on board. So I think I met Nate because my husband and I were doing Dry July, even though it was my birthday month. We might have hit it a little hard in June, so we needed a break. But by golly, we were at Mojave's doors August 1st. To try some of their beers. So we're really excited to see a new brewery pop up. And I know you offer a lot of ciders as well. Can you tell us why that's a focus of yours?
Absolutely. In 2008, my wife was diagnosed with celiac disease. And while having wonderful non-gluten beer is a good thing, and there are wonderful breweries that do that, that was not in my skill set. However, I did know how to make cider from my grandfather and my father. They taught me a little bit of winemaking. And so cider was a natural transition in that direction. And so I thought that I might make some cider for my wife instead of gluten-free beer, which I failed miserably at, to be perfectly honest. So that said, cider for the past 8 years has been part of my life, and it's something that I'm really pleased to bring to our community. It's something that was very important to both Nate and I. Nate's been wonderfully supportive of that in our business, and it's been something that well, it's a new passion, as it were. And so we brew cider as well as beer. Our cider is gluten-free. Currently, we carry a blueberry cider with Michigan blueberry, not Oregon blueberry, but Michigan. And then also we do a beer that is named after one of our wonderful patrons, a wonderful cider that is named after one of our wonderful patrons that is called Flying Hawaiian, which is his nickname. Mm-hmm. And it's a pineapple cider. And we have a lot of fun with our cider. Yep. And we've been having a lot of adventures developing that skill as we take it from home brewing into professional development.
That's awesome. And I know you took over the old Bank of America building on Water Street, and there's a lot of construction there with the new arena and a lot of businesses popping up. Tell us what that's like for you and how that impacts your business.
It's been a real adventure. It's been a lot of fun. We feel like we've gotten in just on the cusp of a real explosion on Water Street. There are so many new businesses opening down here, including wonderful food venues like Biscuits and Bourbon, which is next door to us.
Juan's Flaming Fajitas has been really big down here as well. Kind of paving the way of Water Street. Lovelady Brewing Company has also helped us down here, and we really look forward to what Mojave and Water Street can contribute together and grow from there. So
yeah, and we're looking for other breweries. So if you're looking to place a brewery, please come down to Water Street, because more breweries makes us very, very happy. We love tasting rooms. We enjoy the experience of having so many people come in and tell us about other breweries and what they're having there. So please, by all means, consider coming down to Water Street and tasting our beers. Come over to Henderson in general, because it's fantastic that way.
After you go to Big Dogs.
After Big Dog. Because we
Hit Big Dog.
we definitely want people to taste Big Dog.
And have a couple there, drive safe, or Uber down to Henderson.
Yeah, and make sure you stop by Mike's house and have a saison with him as well.
I'll be honest, Nate and Griff, I keep trying to talk Big Dogs in the mood, like let's have a tap room in Henderson. Gotta happen at some point, right?
Absolutely.
Maybe if I'm out there, they'll do it. Or
Amanda, we would love that. That is a wonderful idea. There it is, ladies and gentlemen. Make sure mark it on your calendars. It's happening. Cheers to everyone, please. Enjoy your beers.
Cheers.
Prost.
Absolutely.